what is Tantra to you, or what's the way you see Tantra and the way you're working with it?
Tantra is a spiritual tradition that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It's debatable, its origins. A lot of academics trace Tantra back just around 2,000 years. But Tantra was really born at a time where there was no written language, there was no historical records being kept, and it was largely an oral tradition, much like indigenous traditions around the world that also go back thousands of years. So it's an ancient spiritual science that comes from the indigenous people of India. And the goal of Tantra is to become one with the supreme consciousness, become one with Brahma. And that is accomplished through meditation, that is accomplished through a sense of devotion and having a relationship with this supreme consciousness. It's largely based on meditation, and also taking this desire for perfection, for enlightenment, and not just keeping it within yourself, but also bringing that out into the world. So much like indigenous traditions have a scope for, seeing the plants as one, and the minerals as one, and the animals as your siblings. In the same way, Tantra externalizes this spiritual edification and externalizes it so that you try to make the world a better place. You try to see everything as one, since in the end, the goal of Tantra is to be one with not just Brahma, but Brahma in all of its expressions and in all of its forms. What is Brahma? Brahma is the Sanskrit word for supreme consciousness. And Brahma is made up of two principles, consciousness and energy, or in Sanskrit, Purusha and Prakriti. So that means that Brahma is observing everything in the universe, and Brahma is doing everything in the universe. Much like us, we have the capacity to do things, but we're always observing ourselves doing things. So we're a reflection of Brahma. So we also are a composite of consciousness and energy at any given moment. That's the short answer of what Brahma is.
And are there any other concepts aside from Brahma that people should keep in mind? Maybe very important.
With Tantra?
Yep.
Well, meditation. So it's based on mantra meditation. And the meditation, the mantra itself is it's like a password that you have. Every time you repeat it, you ideate on it. Yes, you don't repeat it like a parrot. You have to think about what it means every time you say it. You have to visualize what it means every time you say it. And usually your mantra means something like, I am consciousness, or all is consciousness, or I am that supreme consciousness. And the Sanskrit word that is your mantra, you keep secret. It's passed down from a teacher to a student, and that should be kept private just for you. So I would say those are important points. And then, of course, there's a whole philosophy in Tantra that has to do with chakras, has to do with layers of the mind, chambers of the mind, has to do with nadis and breathing techniques and concentration techniques, and also a moral code. The moral code is yama and niyama, which is the code of ethics in yoga. So it's very vast, very, very vast. All of the many different topics that you can find under Tantra.
Usually start by saying what Tantra isn't. So Tantra isn't a religion, right? So you'll find people who say they are goddesses, right? And we talk about worship and sacred sex. So something could be sacred, but it doesn't have to be a religion. So number one, it's not a religion. It's consistent with any religion you practice. It's not, there's no conflict between practicing Tantra and practicing any religion of your choice. So it's not a religion. And what it also is, it's actually, in its essence, it's not a sexual practice, right? So we think about tantric sex. Tantra is a way of life. It's a way of life that promotes a deep awareness, right? Deep mindfulness, being in the moment, and important to people with disabilities and illness, but everybody in this society. It promotes deep acceptance of who you are as a person, right? You are natural, you are born, and we're natural, and also sex is natural. You know, sex isn't a good thing or a bad thing, right? So a lot of people carry sexual shame or guilt, or after a disability, they're attached to what sex meant for them or what it was like for them before. But with the tantric perspective, there's unattachment, there's acceptance. And as people with disabilities, as people with chronic conditions, as people whose gender expression may be different than the norm, whose orientation may be different, it fosters acceptance, deep acceptance of who we are. And through that, and through taking everything as natural, we can transform, basically grow into our best potential.
Most common ones or the most important misconceptions that you think people tend to have about Tantra?
Yeah. The biggest one is sex. So I think, somewhere along the way, in the 1900s, and especially in the United States, there were some people that began teaching sacred sex rituals. And some of these people had some background in Tantra, and this association began. And the misconception also goes back thousands of years. And I have some videos on that on my YouTube channel. But sex is largely associated with Tantra. And I would say that is that's the biggest misconception. Tantra is it's a spiritual thing. It's about meditation. There are that I know of no ancient sexual techniques that today people teach and they bill under Tantra. So the reason I started talking about the new development is because there is something called Neo-Tantra. And Neo-Tantra is about sex. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. So I think it's fair that when you are teaching something about tantric sex, that you call it just Neo-Tantra. And when you're mentioning something like Tantra, that you're not talking about the new modern sex stuff, because that's like an offshoot. So I would say that's a misconception. And there's more, that the sexual thing is just in the West. And then in India, when people talk about Tantra, people are thinking about like spiritism, black magic. A lot of times in the Indian press, you hear about these tantrics that are casting spells on people, that are causing doing a lot of bad things. And they call them tantrics because to say that is to say this is some kind of black magic type person or spiritist. So there's many misconceptions, and that makes my job very hard.
I think sometimes for many people, and especially people struggling maybe with mental health issues, this part of saying, like being in the moment, being present, accepting myself, these things sound difficult to do. So I don't know if like in your experience or, like maybe from your own personal journey or from what you've learned, like how can people, just approach this in a way that becomes a little bit more accessible, if that sounds like a huge thing for somebody to do?
Well, what I teach actually is accessible Tantra, right? And this is accessible for everybody. So in the case, I'll start with a physical disability or chronic physical condition before I go to a mental or psychological struggle. To fight the fact, I was an able-bodied person 40 years ago. I was a lifeguard, a springboard diver. I did karate, right? And when I broke my neck, I lost the ability to do those things in the way I used to do them. It is pointless for me to dwell on the past and to dwell on what I used to be able to do. As long as I dwell on that and compare and feel sorry for myself because I can't move on. I can't grow as who I am, right? So now let's say I have depression, right? And we'll talk about clinical depression, not I'm just down, I'm just blue. I have clinical depression, right? If I beat myself up because I have depression, right, it's going to make me more depressed. If I could accept the fact that I have depression, if I accept the fact that it's a medical condition, if I accept the fact that I'm doing whatever I can to manage my depression, then, and I'm not afraid to share with my intimate partners that I have depression, right? Then life becomes easier. We are working from a place of where we are. That doesn't mean I wish I didn't have depression, right? So acceptance doesn't mean I wish things weren't different. It doesn't mean I wish I could walk. It doesn't mean I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish I didn't have to take medication. It doesn't mean any of those things, right? It means I'm not going to feel ashamed because of my mental illness or my depression or my, anxiety disorder. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm going to accept it when I accept it. If I want to feel better, if there are things I can do, if I want to take medication, I will. If I don't like the effect of the medication on my creativity or whatever, or on my weight, then I won't. But to accept yourself as you are, because we can't change that in the moment, right? We could grow from where we are, but only through acceptance, not through fighting, not through guilt, not through shame.
I'd like to know, how has Tantra, how has it impacted your life? What has it meant in your life? And I think we can divide this in different, aspects, but let's start with, as a person, what's the impact that Tantra has had in yourself as the human you are?
Well, not only has it helped me spiritually so that I can develop my spiritual life, develop my relationship with Brahma, right? With what we call God or supreme consciousness. So not only has it helped in that way, but it also has given me so many teachers, so many people that transformed my life, that gave me so much wisdom, passed down so much wisdom. And also it has given me a moral code, like I was saying, like the yamas and niyamas. Because without any of these things, I just don't know how my life would just be hell. Unfortunately, we complicate our lives so much, and a lot of our negative propensities are always being triggered in our society. And so if we don't have something to counter that or to balance that with a lot of positivity in your life that involves spirituality, meditation, spiritual community, a sense of values that you live by, if you don't have that to balance, I know my life would be completely out of control, So it's done it's an enormous thing for myself personally. And also it gives me an opportunity to touch people's lives, to help people, to be of service. Because if I wouldn't be doing so much spiritual work, maybe I would have done more music, which I was already doing in the past. So pop music, rock music, salsa music. And maybe that could have made some kind of impact, maybe. But I think a better impact is what I'm doing now, because I think that meditation is something that can transform people from within,
I don't know if you have any thoughts on what are like the main or the core ideas that society usually teaches us that we kind of need to let go of before, we try Tantra, for example, or while we do it?
What I say is that we all learn, at least in the West, a Western model, a medical model of sex, or a friction model of sex, right? And friction model or medical model of sex says it's performance-based and mechanistic, which means if you put the appropriate stimulation, right, and the right amount of friction at the right speed, right, to your clitoris or to your penis, that will take you on, an increase in your heart rate and your respiration and magically to orgasm, right? And in the medical model, when I research orgasm, because I was an orgasm researcher, scientists who like to measure things in the lab measure orgasm and define it as really just a genital reflex, right? When in fact, deep orgasm research that looks actually at the mind shows you that the mind, orgasm is a brain-mediated event, right? Yes, most of us know or come to orgasm through genital stimulation, right? But when we understand orgasm as a brain-mediated event and where the position of our mind is going to determine more about a good sexual experience than the position of our bodies. And I often say the feeling in our heart is more important than the feeling in our genitals, right? And the quality of connection. So the medical model is friction-based, performance-based, mechanistic. And when there's a problem, we're treating it with medicine, right? To try to, counteract problems with desire or problems with sexual performance or response, right? So Tantra, or an Eastern model of sex, comes at things from a very different perspective, right? So a Tantra, orgasm in Tantra, is the result of three elements. We talk about unattachment, right? But there's letting go, and there's, being in the moment, and the three elements: timeliness, egolessness, and being natural. Those are the three elements. And those three elements is what gives you the ecstasy, the bliss. And in modern psychology, right, we talk about flow states, right, or being in the zone, right? So if you're exercising, you're doing something strenuous, you're mountain climbing, you're doing something that, I know, like I hand cycle. And when I'm going up the hill, I am focused on going up the hill, because if I don't go up the hill, I'm going down the hill backwards and I'm going to die, And the same thing if you're rock climbing, right? Or skiing down a very, treacherous, black slope, right? If you're not focused, if you're not in the moment, you're going to get seriously hurt. But in those moments, in those flow states, when you're in the zone, right? People are feeling immensely energized, right? They're feeling totally involved. There's great joy in being in a flow state or being in the moment, right? And so basically, using a tantric perspective, when we engage in sexual activity, we lose track of time. We lose track of ourselves, egolessness, as in we're not worried about, do I have a quad belly? Am I going to fart? Am I making too much noise? Right? And so these things, because we have no ego, these things are natural. And if we're natural, egoless, and timelessness, and we could be in the moment and really enjoy the sensations and the pleasures of sex. So that's where this, Tantra or energetic model comes from.
Did learning about Tantra imply that you had to unlearn maybe concepts, worldviews, ideas that you had before you actually ran into Tantra?
Yeah, what comes to mind is, well, first of all, I think that for me to have opened up to Tantra, first I had to unlearn my religious background. So actually, I did that early on. When I was 14, I became an atheist, thanks to a couple of friends who were atheists, and they influenced me in that way. And that was actually really helpful, really, really good, because what they were rebelling against was all the dogma in religion, all of the illogical beliefs that also are unfair. You know, they put women down. They're based on dogmas and blind beliefs. So that was the initial rejection, right? We don't want religion because religion doesn't seem to make much sense on a philosophical level. It has other important values and properties, like religion teaches about charity, about compassion, helping the poor. So it has really good values, but that intellectual side just never made sense, or at least started to clash with me when I was 14. So that divorced me from my own religious upbringing, so that somehow now I was left with an empty plate. And it didn't take long for me to discover Eastern traditions that I found more interesting, like Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And so when I learned about that, then I realized, oh, there's more out there. And I met friends who were Wiccan, who had earth-based traditions that they were doing. And so I found that interesting. And then when the opportunity came to learn meditation, I went with that. And then that led me to Tantra. So I think that's what I had to unlearn. And that was like a pre-unlearning before I would practice Tantra. But then going forward, I have to think about that a little bit more. You know, certainly Tantra forces you to be a better person. I've been practicing meditation for many years, and for 20 years, been practicing Tantra for 20 years. But that doesn't mean that I was always on, the best person that I could be in different situations. And that could be because maybe I wasn't practicing correctly at the time. Maybe I wasn't following my teacher's recommendations properly. And now I guess I'm jumping off to another topic, but I'll close with this. So basically, your spiritual life is important, but sometimes it's not everything. So although Tantra means a lot and meditation is very important to practice, there are still people that I know who practice meditation and are still making lots of stupid mistakes, And so there is something to be said that one must also be willing to have an intellectual approach, and also, get a lot of mental health training, get therapy if required, become well-versed in topics of emotional fitness. You know what I mean? Because if you just sort of say, the only thing that there is for me is my spiritual beliefs, but you reduce intellectual curiosity that could potentially allow you to learn other things that make you a better person, and primarily things that have to do with mental health, then you could be missing out, because we're not, if you practice meditation, it's not going to happen overnight that you become one with the supreme consciousness. You're going to be here for a while. You're going to have beautiful meditations, but in the next morning, you're going to be right back in your room. And your mom's going to be yelling at you from the other room all over again. So That's why it's not enough to just. So how I'd like to answer your question is not so. What you have to unlearn is that your spiritual practices are very important, but you have to unlearn an idea that that's all that's required. You also need a lot of intellectual development that can allow you to be not to increase your intellect, to help you analyze things better, to help you with mental health, emotional health,
make better decisions too.
Right, be more productive, make better decisions. So I hope that makes sense how I answered. It took me a while to get there.
That's okay. It's the way it's what your process took you to, because what I see here is that's what the unlearning from the dogma from religion implied, which was I can have my spiritual practice and still, give my brain the tools it needs so that I can be a better human, like, and live my life better, the everyday life with the little tiny things that you have to do every day.
Tantric sex is sex approached with a Tantra mindset. You don't need to have any physicality at all. You don't need a partner. Through meditation and mindfulness and breathing, sound, moving vibrations, you could experience great pleasure, transformation, ecstasy, bliss without a partner. So, sex in Tantra is a vehicle for transformation. It is not Tantra. Western images of Tantra are a sexual practice. And with that sexual practice, there's all kinds of things. And all of that may be fun, right? Or interesting, or you might be curious. But I teach accessible Tantra. I teach just the mindset, because once again, pleasure and orgasm is a brain-mediated event. Having a negative mindset, being filled with shame and guilt, thinking, negative things about sex can affect your sexual response, your pleasure, and your orgasmic response. So, I don't believe that when a couple gets together, so we talk about couple sex, right, that there needs to be a lot of physicality that you're thinking about, right? So there's nice positions you could get in. So you could go face to face or eye gaze, or, you could, embrace your partner in certain ways. So there are some lovely positions for connection during that. But what's important is, the essence. And when I'm teaching folks, I talk about these three things: stop, focus, and connect.
How would you say that Tantra and sex intersect?
I would say that there's three types of sex. There's physical sex, mental sex, and spiritual sex. Physical sex is when you have sexual intercourse with somebody, right? You're engaged in sexual activity with another person physically. Mental sex is when you imagine that you are having sex with another person. So it's all happening in the mind. And as you know, if it happens in the mind, there's a reaction in the body.
Of course.
And then there is spiritual sex. Spiritual sex is now a psycho-spiritual activity. So it's now the idea of, because when you're having physical sex and mental sex, you are connecting with another person, right? So, but when you're having spiritual sex, now you are connecting with the divine, with the supreme consciousness. So just like you want to connect with another person and be one, we have also a desire to want to connect with that supreme entity and also be one with them. So I think that spiritual sex, like any type of sex, is really just the desire to be allowed into somebody else's world, right? It's desire to be embraced by another person. And that place of vulnerability is actually the most intimate thing that we can have happen to us. So it's a craving that we have. It's something we all long to experience. And that same idea gets applied now to your relationship with the divine, that you also want to enter the divine, be embraced by the divine, be one with the divine. And so that's to me what spiritual sex is. And that's to me what Tantra intersects. Now, you could also be having physical sex with somebody and apply tantric principles where you're making love with your partner, but you feel in that moment that you're actually making love with the Supreme Consciousness. So when you kiss them, you feel like you're kissing the Supreme Consciousness. When you're holding them, you feel like you're holding the Supreme Consciousness. That type of ideation can really make your sexual experience or any activity tantric, because another word for tantric is just spiritual.